Hey, it's Jolly Ecker, hope you're doing well, and today we're back with some more Minecraft dungeons. Well, kinda, because once again we are going to be doing another tier list, this time with the armor, and I'm just going to go through ranking every armor in the game, well, every unique armor in the game, and which ones that I find are the best for me, and the ones that I like to use. Alright, up first is the Titan Shroud, and if you've ever seen me play, this is the armor that I use like 99% of the time, just because I really love this armor. I think it's quite good. The soul gathering on it is okay. I don't ever use soul builds, so I could leave that behind. But personally, I love this armor. Everything else about it is great, so it's going to be our first S tier. Up next is the Golden Piglin armor, and once again, I use this armor on an okay basis, and I quite like it. I think that when you use a health potion, it resets your artifacts, which I do find comes in clutch quite a bit, and so for that I really like it. And I believe that when you use a potion, it also gives you a food item, which is quite nice in case you need it. And so for that, I think this armor overall is pretty good, so I'm going to put it into A tier. Up next is the Spider armor, and I think this armor is just, I mean, it's not the best, but it's honestly not very bad either. I do use it quite a bit, especially because the armor I have has artifact cooldown twice on it for the enchantments, so it's really good for speed running. But the enchantments, obviously, I can't let that affect my ranking of it because that could be on any armor really. But overall, I think it's pretty good, so I'm gonna put it at B tier. Up next is the Black Wolf armor, and I think most of you already know my opinion on this. I don't like this armor. I don't think it's very good. And the main reason being is that the enchantments on it for me are just not very good because it has roll cooldown, which lets you roll quicker. But personally, I'm never rolling, so that doesn't help. Potions heal other players nearby, but I'm almost always playing by myself, so that doesn't really help. I could see where if you're playing with someone else, that'd actually be really handy. And then it has like a weapon boost aura, which is like okay, but my Titan Shrouds has that. So personally, not a huge fan of this. I wouldn't say it's F tier because like it's still okay, especially if you're like playing with other people, then I could see how it could actually be quite good. But it's definitely going into D tier. Up next is the Spooky Gordian, and to be honest, I don't really like this armor. It's basically just all souls, and so if I were using a soul build, then this armor would actually be really good, probably S or A tier, because it'd actually be really good. But since I never use soul builds, I would say it would go into F, but since it looks amazing, I just feel wrong putting it into F, so it's going into D. Next is the Wither armor, and it's the exact same as the Spooky Gordian armor, so it's going into the same tier. Up next is the Verdant robe, and it's going into C tier, just middle of the road. Next is the Fox armor, and it's kind of the same as the Black Wolf armor, because the health potion heals allies type thing, yada yada. But I think the other two enchantments on it are quite better than the Black Fox armor because they are a little bit different. And so for that, I'm just going to put it one tier above. Up next is the Goat Gear armor. And yet again, if you've seen some of my older videos, this was the armor that I used every time before I got this Titan Shroud, before they added the tower or anything like that. And I especially want to show you the enchantments on this one because it's insane. So as you can see here, there's no like reroll enchantments like this, the custom. The custom is when you reroll an item to get better enchantments. But as you can see, this one doesn't have that. So this was before like the enchant smith was even out. And I just happened to get these enchantments, which are just insane. Like these enchantments like combo so well together. Lucky Explorer and Death Barter. It was just the best armor that I could get in the time, really. Like this was my daily driver. This armor just slapped. And of course, I said the enchants alone can't carry the armor to the top because, like I said, I could get those enchantments on any armor. But yet again, I do think that the just normal unique enchantments that come with the armor, I think they are quite good, so I'm putting it into S tier. Up next is the Nimble Turtle armor, and to be honest, I really like this armor. I think it's really quite good, so it's going into S tier. Up next is the Troubadour armor, and I think this one is probably on the same tier as the Fox armor, so going into C tier. Also, I just love the look of this armor. I mean, it looks so snazzy. Up next is the Arctic Fox armor, and of course it's the same as the Fox armor, but it's a special time event, so it looks a little bit cooler, so it's going one tier above. Next is the Sturdy Shulker armor, and yet again, I really like this armor. I think it's really quite good, so it's going into S tier. Next is the Beehive Armor, and this armor is quite good. It does have the same thing as like the heals allies with health potions, but everything else is great about it. I love that it can summon bees because I'm a huge fan of bees, and so I think this belongs on B tier. Next is the Ghost Kindler, and to be honest, I am not a huge fan of this armor, and I think it's going to be our first F tier. I could see it being in D tier because it's not terrible, but I just don't see myself ever using it because it's overall just not very good. Next is the Rugged Climbing Gear, and it's basically the same as like the Goat Armor, except for I think it's probably actually better, and I probably would have ended up using this armor if this armor wouldn't have had such good enchantments when I first got it, because the Goat Armor gives you like an extra roll as its unique enchantment, which is like, okay, that's okay, but this one gives you environmental damage resistance, and it gives you freezing resistance, which just makes it quite a lot better than the Goat Armor in my opinion, so it's going into S tier. Next is the Shadow Walker, and it's going into D tier. Next is Gilded Lor, and when I first saw this armor, I was super excited about it because on paper it seemed way better than my Goat Gear because it had two of the enchantments which made my Goat Gear so good, because it had Death Barter and Lucky Explorer. But sadly, the Death Barter is tier 3, which means you need 150 emeralds, which is 3 times as much as my Goat Gear, which just made this armor not nearly as good, which is quite sad because on paper, if it was only 50 emeralds to use Death Barter, then this armor would have been amazing. But sadly, since it was so expensive, I just never used it, and it's going into B tier. Up next is the Cave Crawler, and it's going into C tier. Next is the Opulent Armor, and I think the idea of the armor is quite cool, but in reality, it's not very good, so it's going into C tier. Next is the Cauldron Armor, and it's one of the more tankier armors, and it just looks awesome, and it's going into A tier. Next is the Archer's Armor, and it's all about using a bow. If you use a bow, then this armor is going to help you a lot, and for me, I use a bow quite a bit, so this is going into A tier. Next is the Hero's Armor, and it's going into C tier. Up next is the Black Spot Armor, and it's also going into C tier, even though I do like the look of it a lot. Next is the Full Metal Armor, and it's the same as the Cauldron Armor, but doesn't look quite as cool, so it's going into B tier. Next is the Frostbite Armor, and I love this armor, so it's going into S tier. The main reason being is that you get the Snowball companion with it. Up next is the Renegade Armor, and once again, it's kind of like a tank armor, so it's going with the other tank armors with B tier because I think they're kind of on the same level. Next is the Frost Armor, and it's going into B tier. Next is the Stalwart Armor, and once again, it's another tank armor, but I think this is actually one of the better tanky armors, so it's going one tier above into A tier. Next is the Cloaked Skull, and it's just the cooler looking version of the Ghost Armor or whatever this one was called, so it's only going one tier above. Next is the Hungriest Horror, and it's the exact same as the Renegade Armor, but once again, it's a special event item, so it looks cooler, so it's going one tier above. Next is the Splendid Robe, and this one focuses mostly on artifacts, so for that it's going into A tier because I love me some artifacts. Next is the Living Vines Armor, and it's going into C tier. Next is the Ember Robe, and it's going into B tier. Next is the Glow Squid Armor, and it's basically the same as the Shadow Walker armor, just a little bit different. But in my opinion, this has to be one of the coolest looking armors in the game. I mean, just look at that. What's not to love about that? And so for that, I want to put it into A tier, but that just seems a little bit disrespectful to the tier list, especially when I put its basically counterpart in D tier. So I feel a little bit bad if I put it into A tier, so it's going to go into B. Up next is the Soul Dancer Robe. I'm probably just going to put it middle of the road into C tier. Next is the Sweet Tooth Armor, and it's the same as the Splunker Armor, but yet again, it looks cooler, so it gets to go one tier higher into B tier. Next is the Highland Armor, and it's going into C tier. Up next are the Unstable Robes, and this armor is super unique, and I just love the look of it, so it's going into A tier. And finally, we have the Hungry Horror, and it's the exact same as the Hungriest Horror. It doesn't even look that different besides the fact that it's red, so it's going right into the same tier as it, into A tier. But there we go, I've now ranked every armor in the game, and I don't think I'll really change much about this list. I think everything belongs where it needs to be. I don't think I'd change anything up. But let me know what your guys' S tier armor is down in the comments below. I'm curious on what your favorite armor is. Also, of course, don't feel bad if I put your favorite armor in a lower tier, because this is just the armor that I personally find really good and that I like to use. But sadly, that will have to do it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you are new, I appreciate if you subscribe. If you like the video, new videos every Thursday, and remember to stay jolly.